Today, in Australia in 2026, we do not have enough houses, not enough to go around. Now, the government today would have you believe that they are the solution. More taxes, more socialism, more government supplying houses for social housing. Guys, this is not going to work. Now, house prices, as the day goes on, are getting more and more expensive. In fact, if we think about in Australia, the median wage times by a multiplier to the median house price, we're sitting anywhere from around 6 to about 12 in our cheapest and top markets. Keeping in mind, this is absolutely nowhere near where most of the rest of the world is. Their multipliers are substantially higher because they've got really small wages and really expensive house prices in comparison. Now, in today's episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through you guys why the system here in Australia is actually so bad for housing supply and why the government actually can't change this overnight. I'm Corey Jones, and I've helped hundreds of everyday workers build wealth with property over the last couple of years, and I've been running this podcast for a good couple of years now. For those loyal listeners who've been listening to me for quite some time, you'll know that my track record is pretty bloody good when it comes to predicting this sort of stuff, because I'm looking at the data and not just making a random guess. Now today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down the list of all the reasons as to why this is not just a simple solution just to build more houses. Like I said, guys, this is not a simple solution. There are many reasons why this is not working right now, and today I'm going to break these down one by one. Housing prices impact everybody. The more expensive that houses are, the harder it is for people to not only get their foot in the door in the market, but also hold on to these properties. Now, obviously for investors like us and our clients, accumulating these, obviously we want prices to rise, but there is a certain point where when it rises too much, it actually makes it unsustainable and unfair for a lot of people. Now, even though I have my vested interest in the investment market and I want clients to make money and I want to make lots of money, I'm sure a lot of guys listening to this want to make lots of money. The reality is a balanced market is actually a far healthier market. We're sitting right now in such an aggressive boom that we've been in for the last couple of years, particularly here in Perth, particularly in Brisbane, particularly in Adelaide. It's all well and good people making money, but it's only a small portion of society. When we have a balanced market, it's better for everyone. But here are the reasons as to why this simple solution is not so simple. So the first reason comes down to lending, borrowing power. So for those who don't know, in 2017, there was a Royal Commission conducted on the banks. Now, I'm going to be honest, I believe there should be another Royal Commission conducted on the banks. However, that's not a podcast that we'll talk about in the future. One of the things that came from the Royal Commission in 2017 was that a lot of people who were during the years of the GFC who were going bankrupt were essentially trying to blame the banks for lending them all the money. All right, in other words, they didn't want to take responsibility of what they were borrowing. They wanted to put it onto the banks and say, you shouldn't give me that money. One of the things that the banks did as a reaction in the Royal Commission in 2017 was they added a 3% servicing buffer on all mortgages. Now, what does that mean in reality? It means that if the interest rate today is at 6%, they're actually going to be assessing you at 9%. So they're adding that 3% servicing buffer on top of the current rate as safety to say that if we get 3% interest rate rises, you can still afford this at 9%. Problem is though, what this did was not only for the new property they're purchasing, they also add that 3% buffer onto the current investments they own and their current home. So when you start stacking on 3% on all of your houses, now trying to go and buy that next house, which is as an investor supplying the housing to the market, you can no longer borrow as much. So that's the first reason when it comes to the borrowing power and the fact that borrowing power has actually been diminished since 2017 for safety. All right, and I understand why. Second thing to do is with bank policy. So nowadays with bank policy, even though you could service your income based on your income, there are certain measures that banks have been putting into place, for example, DTI. Now, all that really means is your debt to income ratios can't be over a certain number. So even if you can make your repayments, just with a simple bank policy around debt to income ratios, a lot of people actually can't continue expanding. And it's got nothing to do with servicing and everything to do with bank policy. So the first aspect as to why we are struggling to supply the market with the houses that we need, all comes firstly to lending and the restriction around banks. Number two, land. See, land right now is actually not a scarce asset in Australia. Ready and developable land is a scarce asset. Now, what does that mean? Australia, we've got a massive country. Land mass, we are huge. One of the biggest countries in the world. I'm pretty sure we're in the top 5, top 10. Now, what this really means is we've got so much land, we simply don't know what to do. Now, keep in mind, the Australian population is generally around the coastline, right, where it's nice and warm near the beach. However, the amount of red tape that it takes for a developer to take a parcel of land, an old farm, the amount of money it requires in planning, the amount of money it's required in civils, with all the red tape actually means that many developers don't want to go and develop right now. Why? Because it's too hard and too bloody expensive. Now keep in mind, guys, we run feasibilities on clients for development literally every single day. Like we are doing like dozens and dozens a week. Most projects are actually unviable because of the red tape and how much money we need to pay to councils, pay to developers, pay in rebates. And when I say to developers, I'm not talking about the development that we're working on. I'm talking about the developer that's next door that put the road in. We've got to send him a refund. Now that refund, in one example we're doing at the moment, is over $250,000 because he's put a big road in. So the reality is, if we want more land available, we need to start removing the red tape. So the red tape for land restrictions is one. Second problem we've got is the urban sprawl versus urban densification conversation. See, Australia got a massive amount of land. The cities over time have sprawled and sprawled and sprawled, and the footprint of the metro areas are generally spread. The opposite end is urban densification, where we build high-rise apartments, and that's fitting a lot more people into the same square kilometre. Now, the problem is the governments want us to densify. The people who want to buy, they want sprawling. They want a backyard, they want pets, they want kids, they want the great Australian dream. For the most part, most people don't believe that being stuck in an apartment with pets and kids is living the great Australian dream. So I understand that conversation. Now, inside this conversation as well, between sprawl and densification, you also have a war that's happening between state and local councils. As an example, the state knows that we want more densification. They want to be implementing policies that frees up and locks up land. However, local councils accept this, just not in our area, please. Do it in someone else's area. So when it comes to the red tape and provisions that some of these blocks have, they actually become unfeasible. So there is an example of a block that we've purchased recently. There is a particular covenant on this block, certain requirement that we've got, that practically means that the block is going to be developed at such a lower value because of this silly provision that local council is doing, and they're only doing it to prevent people from developing. Wankers. All right. So this battle between state and local councils is one that we're fighting every day. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the original point, sprawl versus densification. Ultimately, guys, point number 2 is we don't have enough land. All right. And we can't free up that land quickly unless we have a sweeping review of our legislation. Now, number 3, and this is one that's been in the headlines over the last couple of days, we do not have enough trades in this state for the builders to go and complete the work. We have a huge amount of our workforce, particularly here in WA, particularly in Brisbane, huge amount of our workforce and skilled trades work in the mines. Why? Because they earn way more money. So if you could be a sparky down here or a plumber down here, and you're earning, potentially 2 times the amount working up north, 1 week on, 1 week off, obviously most people would take the trip up north and go work in the mines. Problem is, during COVID, when we went through this expansion in our mining sector because we had a closed border and we were safe from COVID, we were one of the only places in the world that increased mining production, which sucked up all of our workers. Now, at the same time, I'm not suggesting here we need to start closing down mines to bring these workers back. What I am suggesting is our immigration policy needs to be more in favour of skilled workers right now while we have this housing shortage. But also what is adding fuel to the fire is our immigration policy. And the simple fact is we're bringing in more people who are unskilled right now than we can actually house, which is only exacerbating the problem. Now, number 4 is the building industry. Now, I do enjoy and love the building industry, and I say this with love, but there is too much red tape and there is too much taxes for builders to essentially build homes. Now, I will get into taxes in just a second, but when it comes to the red tape for builders, regulation, the amount of work that they've got to do, the amount of things they've got to add into their feasibility in order to comply with the red tape from local councils and state governments essentially adds price and margin to the contracts. I'm going to get into this in a second, but that's why and what's wrong with builders fundamentally. Number 5 are taxes. GST. On every single time a product changes hands throughout the chain of sequence from ripping out the iron ore in, let's just say up north in WA, getting the iron ore overseas to get it produced, get it back into Australia as a refined product, every single time it changes hands, there is 10% margin across the board. The point of the story is, when we start adding and stacking on GST upon GST upon GST on every single transaction from the time that the iron ore gets ripped out of the ground all the way through until the completed, refined, produced product gets to site, we have around 40% of our building contracts are purely up to tax. And again, guys, it's not just in the products, it's also the trades. Every single trade that goes on site has GST on top of it. Every single time they've got a call-out fee with GST stacked on top. So the amount of money that's actually in a building contract today, they're saying right now, the HIA is saying right now, around 40% of our building costs are purely just in GST. Now, thanks to the recent budget, and the removal of negative gearing and capital gains taxes, or the let's just say the fuck around with them, they're actually disincentivizing property investment. So it's all well and good to sit here and say that we're going to limit negative gearing to new properties only, therefore it's going to continue houses being built. In reality, that's not how it works. We've already seen the new construction contracts already drop in volume. Now, what does that mean? What it means is there is a big chunk of the population that will never build a house. Why? Because of all the negative propaganda and the negative media over the last 5 years of builders going under, putting up prices and having huge time delays. So the reality is there is a chunk of the market that will never build a house. They can no longer claim negative gearing because they're not going to build, and therefore they can't get into the market. There is a big chunk now, thanks to the the CGT, that won't actually get into the market. They believe they're going to get taxed too much, and therefore there's no point of even trying, and they're just going to keep their money under their pillow rather than actually put into the market. So because of the government's taxes with GST, the negative gearing changes, and the capital gains tax changes, they have essentially disincentivized property investment and the construction industry. And then number 6, the final piece of the puzzle. Because of all of these factors, lending is restrictive, there's not enough land, there's not enough trades, the builders' red tape is out of control, the amount of taxes that we're paying is out of control. What does this lead to? It leads to substantially higher pricing. High enough pricing that we simply do not make enough money as a society to continue paying for the current median house price unless something gives. For example, 40-year or 50-year home loans becoming the norm very soon. So the reality is, guys, all of these measures are essentially not isolated. These are layer upon layer upon layer as to why we can't just click our fingers and have these housing supply to the market straight away. And also why, despite what the government tells you, they cannot do this alone. Sure, they can go and make some policy change. Sure, they can implement and strip away some red tape. Sure. But the reality is there is so much more in terms of other layers that are impacting this as well, that they have to go and change all 6 of these aspects, not just change one. Now, what do you want to do with this information? For those who aren't sure about what to do, the way that I view this, property investment is not dead, particularly after the budget. In fact, all of these things are all the reasons as to why, as a society, we are struggling to supply enough houses to the market based on what we need. Not just today, not just for our current huge immigration, not just long term, overall. So what does that actually mean? It means that we're going to continue struggling. The government is still bringing 300 to 400,000 people here every single year. Even if there was a government change with One Nation and they want to strip that down to about 150,000, we simply aren't building enough houses right now for these numbers. Right now, sure, if we bring it down to 150, sure, it might give ourselves a bit of breathing room. But the reality is, over time, Australia as a nation, we import more people here than we give birth to. Right? So the reality is, unless we're going to be able to bring houses over on a ship, which we're just not, yet we're bringing all these people into the country, we've got to strip away some of this red tape, some of these taxes, and free up the construction industry so that they can actually supply houses to the market. Otherwise, house prices are going to continue booming. And I would rather be into the market right now and continue to invest and ride that wave than wait for this all to settle and then houses start to stabilize and you get in and not have a performing property. Hope that helps, guys. Any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll chat soon.